Mark Lynch. My background is a mix of positions in the public service and the academic sector. I started out at UQ and then went across to the Department of Justice, and then that led to a variety of positions, including a 6-month stretch in Premier and Cabinet, and I'm currently on a jump back into the academic sector at UNE, and we'll probably jump back into government at some point in the future. The reason that I've jumped to and from the academic sector and the public sector and government sector is that they seem to me they're both arenas in which you try and make changes in the real world. And, you know, ask me on different days and I'll have different views about which of those arenas or domains I prefer. But they're very separate. And as somebody that has jumped to and from, I suppose I'm particularly conscious of the importance of the different cultures characterising each of those two sectors. And so it's just a never-ending issue / problem as to how you get those two sectors working better together, get a better fit between them. And so I was very keen to take up the invitation to come along today, because that's just going to be an ongoing, never-ending task, getting those two sectors aligned. And there are good reasons to think that at the moment the sectors are not actually moving closer together, they're moving further apart. Look, government draws on research in all sorts of different ways. So a lot of it's invisible. So a policy officer that's asked to prepare a brief on something will refer to research literature, and to varying degrees and with varying degrees of skill and expertise in drawing material out. Other times government has specific issues that, you know, explicitly require that some research either be undertaken or referred to or whatever. So there isn't any one way. It really depends on the issue as the day will determine the extent to which and the way in which research is drawn on. The challenge is making sure that for all those different issues of the day, research is inserted into it in the way that is most appropriate for that particular exercise or whatever's happening. And that might just be a one-page brief for a minister on a fleeting interest, or it may be a major initiative involving the Commonwealth Government or whatever, which will require a completely different sort of involvement with the research community. Look, it's oversimplifying it a little bit, but policy officers across government, and particularly in central agencies like Treasury and Premiers and Cabinet, will be briefing on, a dozen things a week, easily, each policy officer. And so each of those issues, they'll be producing a 1.5-page brief max, and embedded in that there should be some knowledge of the evidence base relating to whatever the topic of the brief is. So that's just an ongoing kind of bread and butter, core, staple, however you want to think of it, aspect of the way in which research is drawn on and is inserted into machinery of government processes. Over and above that, in line agencies rather than central government, they will be doing small and large initiatives of one sort or another, which some will require evaluation projects, some will be much more action research, but they will be involved in bigger, the sorts of research exercises that academics are much more likely to want to be involved in. And then there'll be, at any given time, there'll always be a couple of flagship exercises happening, which will involve very substantial amounts of investments of money, and typically central agencies like Treasury and Premier and Cabinet would be actively involved in, and they may be monitoring it in some way. There will be different mechanisms, there'll be oversight mechanisms, reference groups, whatever. It'll vary from project to project. But there'll be, at any given time, you could invariably point to a couple of flagship research exercises, which would typically be kind of multi-million-dollar ones and might involve other jurisdictions in the Commonwealth Government or whatever. So you've kind of got, it's oversimplifying, but you've got 3 levels and 3 different ways in which the academic community is being tapped. In terms of how you package up those research products so that they have a higher profile in government and with ministers, there's a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. That it's very rare that you're going to produce something which specifically cites an academic journal article or whatever. And in 7 years, 6-7 years, I never once cited a journal article in a brief to the Premier, not once. And in fact, I can't think off the top of my head of any time a policy officer did a draft of a brief and cited a journal article in support of it. We might have talked around those issues, but it wouldn't be in the material. So it's kind of embedded in the... so it really is, well, how does the academic community ensure that a fairly junior level policy officer draws on their work when they produce a one-page brief that they take to their director, which then the director takes to the executive director, and the executive director takes, and so on up the line to the Premier. There's some really basic things that that policy officer is going to start with Google. I mean, that's the unpalatable reality of how it works. And if somebody has done a fantastic piece of work and it's been published in a refereed journal, but that journal's online presence only produces the abstract, for instance, that policy officer who comes up in the page listing is not going to chase it up. They're just going to go to, well, what's the second listing in the page listing, and let's hope that the actual article is there rather than just the abstract. So it's about making visible, and that's over and above trying to establish personal links with key people across government, and that's really, in a sense, the way that people can have a more effective profile is having somebody that understands what they're doing, is convinced that what they're doing may have some relevance to a government issue of a day, and is prepared to bring it to the foreground in some way in their briefs. And it's important to keep in mind that if a policy officer is doing 12 briefs on 12 different topics, none of which they have any substantive knowledge on, you don't have much time to catch their attention and hold it. Look, in terms of increasing the likelihood that those research products will be picked up by things like Google, then the sorts of things that need to be done are really pretty obvious, in a sense, that the page needs to be in a form which is going to be easily digestible by a policy officer, because they're not going to have much time, and if they don't think in the first 30 seconds that if I keep reading this is going to give me the information that I need, they'll just jump to whatever's the next listing. So it needs to be not just putting up the journal article, although that's a better start, that's better than just having the abstract. But if you actually want to have a higher profile, then that material needs to be translated, in a sense, into a form that a policy officer can really readily use. And that's really just kind of executive summary format and bullet points and just the conclusion right up front. These are the key issues, this is what it means. If you can get it down to a page, and then have the other stuff buried in hyperlinks underneath it, so the policy officer can go to the supporting material if they want, but if they haven't got time, but they feel confident that they can take what's in the executive summary, they can put it in their brief, and if they get bailed up by the ED or the DG or whatever, they'll be able to quickly go back and substantiate what it is, and they'll feel confident that it'll be there because it comes from a reputable source. But they probably won't go to it 99 times out of 100. They'll just take what's in the executive summary.